All right, welcome to EKG Chapter 1. This is your PowerPoints. They are found in your Canvas underneath Files, and this is where I will hold my lectures. You notice that it will not just be a video of me talking to you. We will go through slide by slide the material in your PowerPoint, which should correlate with your textbook and also your Pearson homework site. So again, these slides can be found under Files in Canvas underneath your PowerPoints. All right, so Chapter 1 is a review of going over the cardiac anatomy and physiology. And we're going to talk about, exactly what the heart is, first of all. So the heart is a muscular organ about the size of a man's closed fist. Now, if you've watched the videos already in the crash course, you'll notice that the guy tells you that the heart is the size of two hands clasped together like this. As far as your certification goes at the end of this class in EKG2, at the end of EKG2, when you take your certificate test, it may ask you how big is the heart. The answer is the size of a man's closed fist. Okay? So, what is the function of the heart? Its function is to pump enough blood to meet the body's metabolic needs, and it can beat 60 to 100 times per minute. And again, in those crash course videos that I have posted underneath PowerPoint clips to review material, you will notice that some of them are going to be a little bit off on their numbers. So for learning purposes and for that national certification at the end, the heart beats a normal rate of 60 to 100 times per minute. And the heart is the size of a man's closed fist. The heart is a muscular organ. The heart is located in the thoracic cavity in the mediastinum. It is above the diaphragm, behind the sternum, and in front of the spine. You need to know this location because a test question, again on that certification, can ask you, is the heart in front or behind the spine? Well, technically it cannot be behind the spine. It has to be in front. Is it above your diaphragm or below? Is it behind the sternum or is it in front of the sternum? And so forth. So your heart is located in a thoracic cavity in the mediastinum, above the diaphragm, behind the sternum, and in front of the spine. The top of the heart is called the base, and the bottom is called the apex. So a good way to remember is you always think of the base being the base at the bottom, right? So when you think of the heart and you're trying to label or determine which is the base and which is the apex or the apex, you automatically reverse your thinking. The top of the heart is the base, the bottom is the apex. All right, so here it is in a visual. In figure 1.1, the heart's location in a thoracic cavity, and you'll notice this is everything we just said. It is in front of the spine, behind the sternum, above the diaphragm. The apex is the bottom and the base is the top. So then that leads us to our heart layers. We have 3. These are really easy to remember. You have your epicardium, which is the outermost layer, which contains your coronary arteries. Your myocardium is the middle, thickest layer, which is made of muscle. And your endocardium is the thin, innermost layer that forms the heart valves. The cardiac conduction system is in this layer. Okay? So, again, a way for me to memorize this is the outside of the heart is epic, right? When you look at the outside of a heart, it's just amazing. It is an epic. It is on the outside, the outer layer contains your coronary arteries. Your myocardium is the middle and it is the thickest layer that is made of muscle. And your endocardium is the thin innermost layer. It's inner. Endo, inner. So that's just a few ways to help you remember the 3 layers of the heart. And then you're going to have what's called your pericardium. Your pericardium is a double-walled sac that encloses the heart. So two different ways that you can think to remember this is, first of all, when you boil an egg and you crack that boiled egg, you notice there's that clear film on the outside, right? So when you peel the hard shell, sometimes that clear shell, that clear sac will come off with that hard shell, or sometimes you have to break it to get that clear sac off around the egg. This is your pericardium of the heart. It is a double-walled sac that encloses the heart. Its purpose is to support and to protect. The pericardial fluid is found between the layers of the pericardium. This minimizes friction of the layers as they rub together with each heartbeat. So think about it, for example, if your legs rub together, you can wind up with a rash, right? Same thing with our heart. We don't want the walls to rub together and cause any kind of irritation. So it is lubricated with the pericardial fluid, which is found in the pericardium. The pericardium is a double-walled sac which encloses the heart. Another way to think of it, like the boiled egg, is a baby, right? A baby is going to be in a sac, right? And it contains the water, right? When somebody's water breaks, if somebody's pregnant. Think of that as well, if that will help you remember what the pericardium is, which is a double-walled sac to support and protect the heart. It also lubricates. All right, so moving on, we have 4 chambers in the heart. Your chambers can be deciphered between top and bottom and left and right. The top 2 chambers of your heart are going to be your atrium, and the bottom 2 chambers are going to be your ventricles. The right side will have the right atrium on top and the right ventricle on the bottom. The left side will have the left atrium on top and the left ventricle on the bottom. So again, it's divided from top and bottom, left and right. Top is atrium, bottom is ventricles, right and left sides. So your right atrium is going to receive deoxygenated blood from the body. It's going to deliver blood to your right ventricle, whereas your right ventricle is then going to pump that blood to the lungs for oxygen, because the right atrium carries deoxygenated blood, and we need that blood to get to our lungs to get oxygen to deliver to our body. When the blood is out of oxygen, when it gets down to our toes, it's going to come back up to the heart and get back into the right atrium because it is out of oxygen. It is deoxygenated, and it's going to go through the heart, through the pumping station, to get more oxygen from your lungs. So again, your right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body, and the right ventricle pumps that deoxygenated blood to your lungs to get oxygen. So then we have your left side. Again, atrium up top, ventricles at the bottom. Our left atrium is going to receive oxygenated blood. So remember, your right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body, but my left atrium is going to receive oxygenated blood from my lungs. This delivers blood to your left ventricle. Left ventricle is that bottom chamber. The left ventricle is then going to pump that blood out to the entire body. There, the blood is going to go down the circulatory system and deliver oxygen to all your tissues in your body. And when it runs out of oxygen, it's going to come right back up. It is deoxygenated and start all over by entering your right atrium. So you'll notice your atrium chambers, your top 2 chambers, they receive blood. Your right atrium receives deoxygenated blood, and your left atrium receives oxygenated blood. And then your ventricles pump blood out of the heart. which means it needs more pressure to get the blood out. Your left atrium and your right atrium are both sitting on top of your ventricles. So when those atriums fill up with blood, the pressure and the weight of that blood in that chamber is going to push the door open and cause them to go with gravity down into the ventricles below. But the ventricles are not going to go down into another system. They need to go out of the heart by going up, which means your ventricles are going to have higher pressure than your atrium. And they're also going to have a thicker wall because they need a thicker muscle to get all that blood pumped out of the heart. Okay, so atria delivers blood to your ventricles beneath them with gravity. The pressure opens up the doors. The doors are also known as your valves. And they are thin-walled and low-pressure chambers. Your ventricles are high-pressure chambers. The left ventricle generates the highest pressure because it's going out to the body. And the left ventricle is 3 times muscle bulk of the right ventricle. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here. I think I have to highlight. Let's see. Let's do, almost all the colors are used. Let's do purple. So I'm going to purple and try to point what I am discussing. So if you look here, is your right atrium, and over here is your left atrium. These two are your top chambers, atrium. Down here, we're going to have your right ventricle and your left ventricle. So when blood enters from the body right here, it is deoxygenated and it's going to enter from my veins. And from the bottom of the body, same thing. Deoxygenated means no oxygen, and it's going to enter from my veins. Once the blood is filling up in this top chamber, eventually this door right here is going to open. That door is called a valve, and it's going the weight of the blood filling up in here is going to cause that valve to open and fill the right ventricle. Now, when this right ventricle becomes filled up with blood, imagine the back of that door. The blood is now pushing that door closed. The pressure of that chamber, the pressure from the blood is going to push that door closed, and then it's going to go out over here through my left pulmonary artery to get to my lungs to get oxygen. And then I am going to enter through my left pulmonary vein into my left atrium where I am oxygenated. And again, the pressure from the blood entering that chamber is going to force this door open, your valve, and then the pressure from that chamber is going to force that valve close and force your aortic valve to open and send now our red oxygenated blood out to the body. So I hope that wasn't too confusing for you. And you need to be more familiar, more specific. I'm just trying to keep it real simple for you to make it easy to understand. But when blood is going to the heart, we are going to take veins and we are going to be deoxygenated. But when blood is leaving the heart, we leave out of an artery and we are oxygenated. And the only time that an artery will carry deoxygenated blood and a vein will carry oxygenated blood is when I am going to the lungs to get oxygen. Because the only way blood can enter the heart is from a vein, and the only way blood can leave the heart is through an artery. So when I get into my right chamber and I am deoxygenated blood, but I need to get to the lungs. The only way I can leave my heart is through an artery, which is your pulmonary artery, but I am deoxygenated. And when I need to get back into your left atrium, the only way to get in is through a vein, and that is my pulmonary vein. So again, if I am deoxygenated blood coming from the body going to the heart to get oxygen, I'm going to enter through my veins, and these two veins here are called your superior vena cava and your inferior vena cava. And I am going to enter into my right atrium. I am then going to go down into my right ventricle, and then I have to leave out of an artery, my pulmonary artery, to get to the lungs. And then I get oxygen, and then I need to get back into the left atrium through the pulmonary vein. I am oxygenated. I go down into my left ventricle, which then pushes me out of my aorta. Okay, now these valves have names. Sorry about my drawing skills. The valve on your left side, which is going to be in between your left atrium and your left ventricle, is called your mitral valve. And then the valve on the right side of the heart is called your tricuspid valve. So why are they called mitral and bicuspid and then your tricuspid valve? Is because if you were to look down into that area, so imagine you're up here and you're looking down. When you see the valve door open, it's not going to look like a door, but it's going to kind of look like a tricuspid, moon-shaped kind of look. So it looks like there's like 3 moons opening up. And then when you looking down into the bicuspid, it looks like 2. So that's where they get their names. So veins, deoxygenated blood from the body go to the heart through the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium. The pressure of the blood in the right atrium pushes the door, the tricuspid valve, open and fills the right ventricle up with blood. As the right atrium empties, the right ventricle is going to fill up with blood and push the tricuspid valve door closed, and then it is going to open your pulmonary artery door, valve door. There, you're going to go to the lungs and get some oxygen and come back through your pulmonary vein. That's the only time when my pulmonary artery will carry deoxygenated blood and my pulmonary vein will carry oxygenated blood. I am now in the left atrium, and the pressure is going to cause my mitral bicuspid valve door to open, allowing the blood to fill down into the ventricle. As that ventricle fills and the left atrium empties, the filling of the left ventricle, the blood will push the bicuspid mitral valve door closed, and it will open the aorta door valve to go out to the aorta and deliver the oxygen to the body. It does this over and over and over, and this is your circulatory system, and this is the primary function of the heart. Okay, so then here's your valves. You have 4 valves. So your semiluna, that's that moon-shaped valve. You're going to have your pulmonic valve is located between your right ventricle and your pulmonary artery, and your aortic valve, which is located between the left ventricle and aorta. You're going to have tricuspid and mitral. Your tricuspid, these are going to be your AV valves, atrioventricular valves. That's going to come back, that abbreviation, AV. Your tricuspid valve is located between the right atrium and ventricle, and it has 3 cusps. The mitral valve is located between the left atrium and ventricle and has 2 cusps. Alright, so opening and closing is based on the changes of pressure. So what causes our valves? In other words, our doors. What causes the doors to open and close? Think about it. When you are walking out of a door and you are either to push or pull the door. If you pull it and it does not open, but if you push it, it opens, it is a one-way door. meaning you can't pull the door and get in. But if you push the door, you can go in. So the doors, imagine that blood, the chamber, or imagine a room filling up with water. There's going to be so much pressure in the room with water that eventually what's going to happen to the door? It's going to shoot off. It's going to open going out, a one-way door. Once the water is pouring out of that door, can you go back in? No, because the pressure is too high. That door can only open one way. You cannot open it the other way. So your valves, or in other words, your doors, open and close based on changes in your blood pressure. It is open only in one direction of blood flow, so that blood flow cannot go back and get backed up. Closure is responsible for the sounds made by the beating heart. This is a national certification question. So it might ask you, what makes the sounds of the heart? That is the closing of your valves. So the closure is responsible for the sounds made by the beating heart. Lub dub, lub dub. Okay, we have 5 great vessels. So just to recap, your heart is a muscle. It is made up of 3 layers, and it is the size of a man's fist. Your 3 layers are called epi, endo, and myo. Epicardium is your epic, the outer layer. It houses your coronary arteries. The myocardium is the middle layer, that is your muscular layer. And your endocardium is the inner layer of the heart, which houses your conduction system. Then you're going to have 4 chambers. So you have 3 tissue layers. Oh, and we're forgetting you have your pericardium as well, that double-walled sac that protects the heart in the outer layer and lubricates it. So then you have 4 chambers separated by top and bottom, left and right. The top chambers are your right and left atrium. The bottom chambers are your right and left ventricles. Then you're going to have valve doors. You have your aortic valve door. You have your pulmonic, your bicuspid, and your tricuspid valve doors. And now we're going to talk about your 5 great vessels, which we've already touched base on how blood enters the heart. So your 5 great vessels include your superior and inferior vena cavas. These are those veins. They're the veins that return deoxygenated blood to the right atrium from the upper body and the lower body. And then you're going to have your pulmonary artery. This is the artery that takes the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs, and your pulmonary vein, which is 4 veins that return the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So again, the only time a vein will carry oxygenated blood and an artery will carry deoxygenated blood is when there is pulmonary in front of it, when it's going to and from the lungs. Any other time, a vein is going to carry deoxygenated and an artery will carry oxygenated. Aorta is your largest artery in the body, and it sends your oxygenated blood throughout the body. All right, so here's your blood flow, your blood flow through the heart. We're going to enter superior and inferior vena cava into your right atrium, through your tricuspid valve, to your right ventricle, through your pulmonic valve, through your pulmonary artery, to your lungs, pulmonary veins, left atrium, mitral valve, left ventricle, aortic valve, aorta, and your body. This is considered your systemic circulation. Okay, so we're talking about all this pressure, right? The pressure of the blood causes the valves to open and close. It causes the filling, so when the door opens, the blood is then either going to go down into the ventricle or it's going to go out into the lungs. So you have 2 phases, and this is also referring to your mechanical events. These words are very important, mechanical. You'll see why in the next few chapters. So right now, the cardiac cycle, refers to your mechanical event that occurs to pump blood. There are two phases for your cardiac cycle: diastole or diastole or systole. Your diastole, which is how I say it, is when your ventricles relax and fill. Systole is when your ventricles contract and expel. Okay? Very, very, very important to remember these. Diastole, relax. Systole, contract. Diastole, relax. Systole, contract. If you need to write those down a few times, I promise writing and saying it out loud is a good way for studying versus just reading and overlooking it. Okay, so your cardiac cycle, you're going to have what's called your diastole, your rapid filling phase. This is when your AV valve, remember AV stands for atrioventricular valve, pops open because of the pressure gradient from the atria to the ventricles. The ventricles are then going to fill rapidly. So imagine the atrium is filled up with blood, and eventually that door is going to pop open, and it's going to be a rapid flow of blood into your ventricles. This is your rapid filling phase. Diastasis is when the flow into the ventricles slows as pressure equalizes. So the ventricles are becoming more filled and the flow is not as fast. It's going to slow down because it doesn't have such a big gap to fall down to. It's slowly rising. So diastasis is when the flow in the ventricles slows as pressure equalizes. Atrial kick is contract. The atria are then going to contract, squeezing the remainder of the blood into the ventricles. The valve leaflets are going to push upward and shut by rising pressure in the ventricles. This is important. So what causes your valves to open and close in the heart is the pressure from blood, diastole and systole. But what causes your heart to contract after all the blood has been released? What is going to cause the atrial kick, the atria to contract? That's going to be chapter 2. All right, here's an example. So let's see. Let's do green. So here in the rapid filling phase, right here, you see that my tricuspid valve door is open and I am filling up with blood right here. So this is filled up and the blood is coming down. Rapid filling, it's going really fast. And simultaneous means it happens to both sides. So while this side is deoxygenated blood on my right, the left side is also contracting up here. I'm sorry, we don't contract the atrial kick. Is also filling up here, pushing your mitral bicuspid valve to open and pour into rapid filling. Then we notice what's happening to my blood here. It's about halfway, right? So is it coming out as fast? We see little droplets here. Is it rapid anymore? No. So now the blood is eventually going to get up to that door and close it. But it has slowed down the pressure, which is diastasis. And then when we get to atrial kick, you'll notice I am almost filled up all the way. And this is almost empty. So when this blood reaches this door is going to shut. But when this blood reaches this door, it's going to open. So when the blood reaches this door, it's going to close. When it gets to this one, it's going to open. This is your atrial kick. So what causes the contraction up here? What causes that contract? That is going to be my contractile cells, my cardiac cells, and my conduction cells. Chapter 2. Okay, systole is going to be isovolumetric contraction. That's when all the valves are closed. The ventricles contract, but no blood is flowing. And then you have what's called ventricular ejection. This is when the semilunar valves, this is the tricuspid and bicuspid that we're talking about, open and blood pours out of your ventricles. So again, systole is when in the isovolumetric contraction, all valve doors are closed, ventricles contract. The ventricular ejection, semilunar valves open, and blood pours down to your ventricles. Systole, you're going to have what's called your protodiastole. This is when blood flow slows as pressure equalizes. And isovolumetric relaxation is going to be when your ventricles relax. Valves close due to back pressure from the aorta and the pulmonary arteries. Okay, and this is going to show you the phases of systole. So we're going to see, you notice your isovolumetric contraction going on here. So my chambers, my ventricles, they are filled with blood, and I'm going to get a contraction all around here. This is from my cardiac cells, and they're going to push the blood out into the lungs and into the body. From there, that pushing is going to be that injection. And then we're going to go into the protodiastole when it slows down. Notice the drops. And isovolumetric when we are relaxed. So this is, we're going from contraction to relaxation. Okay, so how does blood, we know that blood, the flow through the heart, the deoxygenated blood is going to go through the superior inferior vena cava into your right atrium, through your tricuspid valve, into your right ventricle, through your pulmonary valve, through your pulmonary artery to the lungs, back into the left atrium, through the pulmonary veins, through the mitral bicuspid valve to the left ventricles, and then out through the aortic valve to the aorta. But what happens from there? So when oxygenated blood leaves the heart through the aorta, O2, we are then going to enter my arteries, which then become arterioles and end up in our capillary bed. This is going to be my fingers and my toes. And this is going to be a mixture of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Okay, so the oxygenated blood from my aorta leaves the heart, goes to my arteries, which eventually become arterioles and reach my capillary bed, which is my fingers and my toes, a capillary finger stick. And then to come back, we're out of oxygen, we're going to come back through my venules, which turn into my veins and enter to the superior or inferior vena cava. Alright, so oxygenated blood leaves the aorta, enters the arteries. Arteries narrow into arterioles, and they empty into the capillary beds. Nutrient and oxygen extraction occur here. So when we're going from my arteries to my arterioles, this is where nutrient and oxygen is extracted. Deoxygenated blood enters your venules. Venules become wide into the veins, and blood returns to the vena cava. So notice, if we're into my arterioles, we are narrow. The arteries become narrow into arterioles, but the veins become wide into venules. This is showing you your circulatory systemic circulation. So here's your heart. Right here is your heart. And then these, where you see a mixture of red and blue, this is all capillaries. This is all capillaries. Okay. So over here we are deoxygenated, the blue side of the heart, and the red side we are oxygenated. So when we get into the heart and we go to our lungs, we are getting oxygen exchange into the from the capillaries. And when we leave the heart, we're going to deliver and wind up in a capillary bed. All right, coronary arteries. These are important to know because it's got a lot to do with EKG blockage. You know, if you heard somebody say, oh, I have a blocked artery, this can be very dangerous on the heart. So your heart has its own circulation. So the circulation image that I just showed you, that is showing you your systemic circulation throughout the body. It's not talking about the heart's own circulation. So just like our body tissues need oxygen, so does our heart. But if the heart is supplying the body with oxygen, who is supplying the heart with oxygen? That's why it has its own circulation. The coronary arteries do this for the heart. They supply the oxygen. So they arise from the base of the aorta. Remember, base of the heart means the top of the heart. Where is your aorta located? On the top of the heart, superior. So they arise from the base of the aorta, and they course along the epicardial surface of the heart. Remember, epicardial is the outside layer of the heart. So where are your coronary arteries located? On the outside layer of the heart, which is your epicardium. They then are going to dive into your myocardium, which is your middle layer of the heart, to provide blood supply. Only in diastole or diastole is the heart able to feed itself. So only, that's very important to know. Who feeds the heart? Coronary arteries. Where are they located? They arise from the base of the heart, which is at the top, and they course on the outside of the epicardium and then dive into the myocardium to provide blood. But they can only do this in the diastole phase. The left main artery, and this is a very important abbreviation to know. It's going to come back at you towards the end of EKG 2. And everything that you're learning from now up until the end of EKG 2, you have to know. You put it to memory, know it. Don't just memorize it for a quiz and then or for homework and then forget all about it, because in the long run you need to know this information. It's going to come back to bite you. So the left main coronary artery, also known as the LMCA, provides blood flow to the walls of the left ventricle, and it perfuses about 60% of the myocardium. So what's most important for you to know right here, right now, is that your left main coronary artery, which is your LMCA, provides blood flow to the left ventricle. Your left main coronary artery has two branches, your LAD and your RAD. Your LAD is the left anterior descending branch. This applies to the anterior wall, hence the word anterior, of the left ventricle. Your circumflex, the second branch of your left main coronary artery, feeds the lateral wall of the left ventricle. So what's most important for you to know is these abbreviations and the two branches off of the left main coronary artery, which is your LAD and your circumflex. LAD supplies blood to your anterior wall, and your circumflex supplies blood to your lateral wall. And then you're going to have your right coronary artery. So I correct myself, I did say RAD. Ignore that, scratch that. The two are circumflex and LAD. Your right coronary artery, RCA, feeds the right ventricle and the inferior wall of the left ventricle. This is very important to know. So your right coronary artery feeds the right ventricle and the inferior wall of the left ventricle. It gives rise to posterior descending artery in 70% of people. And the other 30%, the posterior descending artery rises from the circumflex coronary artery. So this is where not everybody's heart is exactly the same. So if you look here at the image, notice we're anterior and posterior. Anterior means the front view. So if I am looking right through your chest, I am looking at the anterior view. But if I am looking through your back, I am looking at the posterior view of the heart. And then you see all of your coronary vessels. So here you notice your superior vena cava, your right atrium, and then here is your right coronary artery, right ventricle, your left ascending coronary artery, and your circumflex. So here's your two branches. Here's your left main coronary artery, which branches off into your LAD and your circumflex, and then you have your right coronary artery. In the posterior view, you'll notice your PDC, your posterior descending coronary artery, right here. And you're going to have your circumflex right here, your left circumflex right here. Okay? Which means this other one must be your LAD. Okay. Okay. So far, you know the heart is the size of a man's fist, and it is a muscle. It consists of 3 layers with the pericardium. Your 3 layers are your endo, your epi, and your myocardium. Endocardium, your inner layer, epicardium, your outer layer, myocardium, your middle layer. And your pericardium is the double-walled sac outside of your heart that lubricates and supports and protects your heart. Then you found out that we have 4 chambers. Your top 2 chambers are your right and left atrium, and your bottom 2 chambers are your right and left ventricles. And then you found out that we have 4 valves, 4 doors that open and close. You have your tricuspid, your bicuspid valves that are in between your atrium and your ventricles. And then you have your pulmonic and your aortic valves for the blood leaving the heart. Then you found out that we have 5 great vessels. You have your superior and inferior vena cava, and you have your, I'm drawing a blank, pulmonic artery and pulmonic vein, and you have your aorta. Those are your 5 vessels. And then we found out about the coronary arteries. We have your main coronary arteries, we have your LAD, your circumflex, and your posterior coronary artery on the back. Now we're going to talk about your heart cells. We have 2 types of heart cells, your cardiac cells. Contractile cells cause the heart to contract. Conduction cells create and conduct impulses to regulate the cardiac cycle. Okay, so contractile cells, they cause the heart to contract. Conduction cells create and conduct impulses to create the cardiac cells. Another side, conduction is your electrical system of the heart. Contraction is your mechanical response to the heart cells. Okay? So, the nervous control of the heart. Your heart is influenced by an autonomic nervous system. In other words, it automatically controls your nervous system. You're not telling your nerves what to do. Your heart is influenced by an autonomic nervous system. The ANS is subdivided into a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system is mediated by norepinephrine. That's going to come back to bite you in the end of EKG2, knowing about norepinephrine. And it is a chemical which is released by your adrenal gland. It increases your heart rate and your blood pressure, causes your pupils to dilate, and it slows digestion. This is known as your fight or flight response, triggered by stress, exertion, or fear. Your parasympathetic nervous system is mediated by acetylcholine. This is a chemical secreted as a result of stimulation of your vagus nerve. It slows your heart rate, decreases pressure, enhances digestion, and is your rest and digest response.